Welcome to Poetry and Poets with SueAn Stradling-Collins, Director of the Apache County Library District. Today we're going to be talking about Imagism and the Imagist Poets with an emphasis on William Carlos Williams. Imagism was born in England and America in the early 20th century. It was a reactionary movement against Romanticism and Victorian poetry. The Imagists emphasized simplicity, clarity of expression, and precision through the use of exacting visual images. The Imagists based a lot of their ideas on the haiku. The haiku format is very simple. It's something that students like to imitate as well as others. Haiku is a poem of 3 lines with a certain structure: 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. Haiku poetry is not meant to rhyme, and they are to be about nature. Of course, whenever you give a structure to a poem, the rules often change and people start playing with it, and it's become many other things. The Japanese were very famous for their haikus, and one of the most famous was a poet named Basho. And so here is an example of a traditional haiku. It does fit the syllable count. An old silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond. Splash, silence again. An old silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond. Splash, silence again. 575. So that's the haiku. Ezra Pound was important in the beginning of Imagism, and one of his most famous poems is on this card that I have for you there. In a station of the metro. Where is he? Oh, he's over here. Sorry. So I've written it out because it's so short so that you can see the words, but you get an image. You get this very distinct, quick image. Okay, in a station of the metro. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet, black bough. And that's one of his most famous poems, okay? In a station of the metro. An image, something that just captures your imagination, but you can see it as you hear the words that go with the poem. Another one of the Imagist poets is H.D. As she went by, her name was Hilda Doolittle. The poem I'm going to read of hers is called Oread. Oread was a sea nymph, or excuse me, a forest nymph, but she's talking about the sea. So she's kind of talking of something that's out of her element. Whirl up, sea, whirl your pointed pines, splash your great pines on our rocks, hurl your green over us, cover us with your pools of fur. Okay, and that was F-I-R, like a tree. And so you can see that you have the wood nymph making comparisons that you can see with the sea. Too many words that sound the same there. William Carlos Williams was born and died in Rutherford, New Jersey. Born in 1883, died in 1963. He did travel around the world, but he ended up back where he had begun. What's interesting, I think, about him is that he became a medical doctor. And he had opportunities to stop practicing, but he always chose not to. And this is part of why. He talks about his experience writing poetry as a doctor, and I'll tell you what he said. Ideas and stuff had fluttered before me for a moment, a phrase which I quickly write down on anything at hand, any piece of paper I can grab. Some of his poems were born on prescription blanks, others typed in a few spare minutes between patient visits. Williams' work, however, did more than fuel his poetry. It allowed him to, quote, write what he chose, free from any kind of financial or political pressure. And so that is why he kept his practice, because he knew that it gave him the security to express himself. And this is something said about his expression. Thinking of himself as a local poet who possessed neither the high culture nor the old world manners of an Eliot or Pound, he sought to express his democracy through his way of speaking. His point was to speak on an equal level with the reader, and to use the language and thought materials of America in expressing his point of view. He wrote a great deal of poetry. There are two that I want to share with you, probably two of his most famous. And so I will put them there because they're short. And again, as Imagist poetry, they paint a picture. Sometimes there's meaning, sometimes I don't think there is. They're just a combination of those words and what you see in your mind. So these are two of his most famous. Maybe you have heard of them before. The first one is called This Is Just to Say. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet, and so cold. When I was teaching, I would have the students imitate this poem often, and they would come up with wonderful examples. So if you want a challenge and want to include it in the comments, maybe imitate his This Is Just to Say poem. One of his other most famous is called the Red Wheelbarrow, and you can see this is such a great example of Imagism. The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. And I will close with a quote from him. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. I like that expression of his, and hopefully as we share poems with you, you will not be feeling miserable about the lack of what can be found in poetry. Remember to share our posts. Remember to like us and follow us, please. And we'll see you soon.